Nolo VR is the easiest budget option to hop into PC VR. Assuming you already have the required computer specs and a compatible headset, Nolo is as simple as installing the driver, plugging everything in, and hopping into virtual reality. Of course, this doesn't mean Nolo is perfect. It comes with its own plethora of problems and quirks that make it far from. But let's dive right in and take a look at whether or not Nolo is actually any good at being a cheaper alternative to the Vive. So Nolo was kickstarted back in February this year, and since then has really gained some traction. It is enticing to be able to play VR games designed for an $800 Vive on something as readily available as your phone. It lets you do just that, and it does a pretty good job at it. In the box, you get two controllers, one headset marker, one base station, and some cables. The controllers provided are very comfortable and mimic a Vive 1 pretty well with a clickable touchpad, trigger, grip button, menu button, and a system button. A few drawbacks worth noting right now about these controllers is that the trigger has no analog input. This means that it is either completely pressed or not pressed at all. There is no in between like there is on the Vive, despite the Nolo's triggers having a pretty large pull. The other issue with the controllers right now is a software thing, so it might be fixed in the future, but the touchpad does not map one-to-one to the Vive's when in Steam VR. Running your finger along the outer edge of the Nolo's touchpad will not reach the edge of the emulated Vive's touchpad. In most games this isn't even really a problem, but it's still worth noting as there are a few games where you will suffer from this. Pavlov! Now the way Nolo's positional tracking works is by all the hardware syncing up to the headset marker, so that it can send positional data to the PC via USB, which it gets by referencing the base station's location. Quite honestly, the tracking is spot on. As long as the sensors on the controllers and headset marker can see the base station, there really aren't any issues. The problem with this setup is that with only one base station, positional tracking is completely lost anytime that line of sight is broken. Now in a recent software update for Nolo, if this occurs, the controller just stays in the same location it was when it lost tracking, and you're still able to rotate the controller. This is a huge improvement to how it was originally, where the controllers just disappeared. Now in the headset marker, if you lose tracking, it will stay in the same location as well, but only for 2 seconds before it fades to gray if tracking isn't regained. It's not the most elegant solution, but it isn't bad either for its limitations. So Nola does give you full room scale, which is awesome. It isn't quite as impressive in scale as the Vive or even the Rift, but for having only one base station and for how easy it is to set up and use, I don't really have any major complaints. It works really well. What I do have complaints about though is the lack of a full 360-degree tracking solution. Being that the sensors need to be able to see the base station, facing in the opposite direction is a no-go. This is okay if you limit yourself to front-facing games, but play anything that requires you to make use of the full 360 degrees, you'll have to decide between two official workarounds. The first solution is a feature built into the Nolo software that completely shifts your view 180 by double tapping the menu button on either of the controllers. At first, this sounds like an okay solution to have a turnaround button, but it has some issues. Even when you're double tapping the menu buttons with the intention to just turn 180, the game you are playing will still think you clicked the menu button twice. In some games this is okay, but in something like Pavlov, you'll just be throwing guns on the ground every time you turn around. That's not very fun. The second solution to this problem is by replacing a file in the Nolo folder to enable the base station to work while it's mounted on your ceiling. To me, this is really the way to go. The main drawback to having the base station on the ceiling is that your playable tracking area is sort of dependent on how high your ceiling is. There are some other downsides to doing this, but I truthfully don't feel like they're even worth mentioning for how trivial they are when compared to having the freedom to not worry about which way you're facing. Now Nolo of course is not an all-in-one VR system. You still need a VR headset to use in conjunction with it. Nolo does have a list of officially supported headsets you can check out, including the DK2, Pimax, HDK, and some OS VR headsets, but probably the most popular thing to do is use Riftcat with a mobile headset. So I'm going to be honest, I have no experience with using Nolo with anything other than mobile headsets, but I would have to imagine that using a dedicated PC headset would be much more ideal than using a mobile headset with Riftcat, primarily due to latency that's introduced when using your phone. The latency you experience with Riftcat's not exactly a deal breaker, but it will absolutely take some getting used to if you're already used to using something like the GearVR or Vive, because the latency is absolutely there. This isn't something that you should just discount or brush off as not a big deal when deciding whether to purchase Nolo or not, because if you go the mobile headset route, you're going to get noticeable levels of lag. There's really no way of avoiding it. For my setup, I use a GearVR as my headset, and if you have the compatible phone, I would highly recommend doing this as well, because Riftcat is able to utilize the high-quality sensors built into the GearVR and collecting rotational data from the phone to make head tracking a whole lot more accurate. If you do not have a GearVR, you can still use Nolo with any other mobile headset out there, but rotational data will be gathered from the Nolo's headset marker. In my opinion, it doesn't even compare to what the GearVR offers. If I had to use it, I would, but to be completely honest, the sensors in your phone would probably do the job just as well. I know my experience isn't going to be identical to everyone else's in this regard, so take what I say about Nolo's rotational data with a grain of salt. Nolo is currently priced at $200 with shipping in the US running about $30. Since Nolo comes with everything you need to get set up, as long as you have a headset and a good PC, you shouldn't really need anything else in the hardware end of things. Now if you plan on going the mobile headset route and using Riftcat costs about $20 at full price, which for what it does is pretty reasonable. Alright, taking a step back here, it's really hard to give a definitive yes or no in terms of whether Nolo is good enough to justify buying. There are so many different factors to take into account, it's really up to you to decide if it's worth it or not. Now personally, I think Nolo does a great job at being a budget Vive. It isn't nearly as capable as the Vive, but it definitely gives you that extra bit of immersion by being able to move around the room and getting your hands into the game. But at $230, it's a tough cookie for me to sell when a complete PS Move service setup can run you half that cost, give or take. But still, at its current price, it is a great alternative to spending $800 on a Vive. When put up against the cheaper Oculus and touch controllers though, things get a little dicey in terms of price versus quality. I'm not going to go into that in this video. Well, that's all I got for this review. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching. Don't be afraid to ask me any questions in the comments or voice your own opinions. I'll catch you next time.